أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ومن آياته أن خلق لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا لتسكنوا إليها وجعل بينكم مودة ورحمة إن في ذلك لآية لقوم يتفكرون. ومن آياته خلق السماوات والأرض واختلاف ألسنتكم وألوانكم إن في ذلك لآية للعالمين. Sadaqallahu Alazim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and among his signs is this, that he created for you mates from amongst yourselves, that ye may dwell in tranquility with them. And he has put love and mercy between your hearts. Verily, in that are signs for those who reflect. And among his signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth and the variations in your languages and your colors. Verily, in that are signs for those who have knowledge. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another episode of Islam for Europeans. I'm your host, Robert. And I wanted to respond to this interview that Brother Yahya Birt gave for the Thinking Muslim. And I know this is a bit late because I know he responded to my debate with Brother Umar Lee, in which he disagreed with both of our stances. So I wanted to give an official response to this entire interview. I listened to it more than once and made notes on it. Now, on the surface, one would think, okay, Rob is going to disagree with everything that Brother Yahya had to say. And that's not actually true. I thought I would be very fair and judicious and give credit where credit is due, because I do think that a lot of what he said did ring true. However, I wanted to, give a very modest critique at the same time to better understand where our differences lie. And, there's going to be differences, of course. I mean, I'm sure that, the people who support and, are in Brother Yahya's corner are not going to agree with me. But, I just thought I would give our side of the story here at Islam for Europeans. Again, we're a very small channel, but our support is growing. We have the support from many, many born Muslims. Actually, converts, white converts seems to be our greatest detractors. But in any case, let's get into it. So I want to give a caveat here first and foremost that, as we've been saying on this channel several times, and as I've said on the features, with Brother Bilal, is that by and large, there is a schism that exists within the European right wing between two different factions. Okay, now one of these factions gets all the mainstream attention. They're the ones who get the book deals, the radio deals, the large YouTube channels. And they're the ones who get clout in political arenas as well. They're more likely to be supported by mainstream moderate right-wing parties, right? And we'll call this side just for simplification purposes, the anti-Islam right. Okay, that's what I like to call them. Okay, so this includes pretty much all the figures that Brother Yahya said in his interview: Douglas Murray, Ayaan Ali, Jordan Peterson. You can include Tommy Robinson, and then you look at political leaders. You have Donald Trump, Boris Johnson. All of these fall under this particular faction of the right, which I call, I guess I term the anti-Islam right. And this group is supported by the establishment. So the main markers of these particular groups are they're very anti-Islam leanings. Ranging from mildly negative to highly negative. They're very pro-liberalism, so they see liberalism as a default way of life or method in which the West became successful. They're very pro-neoconservatism. So I know that in the early 2000s, these were people who would have been supporting the war in Iraq. The invasion of Iraq and the invasion of Afghanistan, and that's why they're in back then, they could criticize Islam left, right, and center. So that was like basically their main focus because they wanted to shift Western public opinion against Islam and Muslims, because they needed popular support for those horrible invasions. Right? So they're pro-neoconservatism, they're pro-liberal, and they're pro-Zionism as well. They support the Israeli side in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, bar none. Right? So you can also include institutions such as PragerU, anyone that comes out of there, like Amala. You can also, the Daily Wire Plus is another one of these groups that are all supported by the anti-Islam right now. Anti-Islam sentiment is not the main focus of their videos now, but they definitely, as Brother Yahya stated, they have a lot of anti-Islam figures to be, the kind of the default expert, quote unquote, expert on Islam, like your Ayaan and whatnot. So that's one side. That's the anti-Islam right now. The other faction has been almost completely deplatformed, right? And this is what I guess for simplicity purposes, we can define them as the dissident right. Now, this faction of the right is, their main ideologies are is that they're anti-liberalism. So they see liberalism as leading to, the destruction, basically the death of the West. The fact that this was led to the supporting the trans agenda, supporting any type of a way of life that's opposed to traditionalism, right? And that includes the Islamic lifestyle. So their thoughts on Islam range anywhere from mildly negative to neutral to even positive. Many of them have they support Islam as a traditionalist lifestyle. So their attitudes towards Islam itself are more definitely more positive than the anti-Islam right. They tend to be very pro-Palestinian. They were against the neoconservative invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan in the early 2000s, and the continued support from Western governments who have supported puppet dictators such as, I'm not going to name names, but they support these puppet dictators, and this is what has led to the destruction of the Muslim world that has precipitated many of them, to be forced to have to migrate to Europe in the first place. So they're far more this group is far more politically astute. I think they're aware that there's also many Muslim refugees who are currently living in refugee camps in Muslim nations, Turkey, Syria, Jordan. Many of them openly support or supported Islamic leaders who, I guess, pushed up against the West or were antagonistic towards the West, such as Muammar Gaddafi, Yasser Arafat. And not that I support these guys in total either, but I'm just trying to think of some other people. Saddam Hussein, you'll see, openly supports Saddam. So this particular group has been almost completely deplatformed, and for this reason, not just Brother Yahya, but basically every mainstream Islamic spokesperson is completely unaware that this faction among the right exists, right? But if you've been on any type of, if you've been on Twitter, any type of social media, there's many Muslims who watch our channel who are well aware that this faction does exist and is quite large. I would say almost 50-50, with the anti-Islam right? Now, as a caveat, Islam for Europeans is an apolitical organization. We do not endorse making alliances with either of these groups. And I'm going to get into detail with the pitfalls and mistakes that were made with these interviews with Jordan Peterson and Roger Scruton, but in other areas where I do think there would have been utility in it, but at the same time, I don't think that the people who interviewed them were aware of the schisms that existed, right? So, but getting into Brother Yahya's interview with the Thinking Muslim, I think when he was giving this interview, when he referred to, say, for example, what he termed as white nativism, right? So a lot of the points that he made in what he thinks is white nativism is actually, the a lot of the points of the anti-Islam liberal establishment. So your Jordan Petersons and whatnot. So, for example, the fact that they ignored or minimized, the West colonial history. This is a point that, the dissident right in some cases would disagree with. They are well aware that, Western governments, used hegemonic power after the tragic events of 9/11 to destabilize the entire Middle East, right? Now, the anti-Islam right would totally downplay, this particular facet of history, which, would understandably make a lot of Muslims upset, right? And this is the problem because the dissident right has been largely deplatformed. They end up not interviewing Muslims, and vice versa. No one, these two sides basically never reach out, and your Jordan Petersons of the world end up becoming, the de facto voice for the quote unquote right. So I can understand why the confusion would come in. To say that, Jordan Peterson is somehow a white nativist, now this is absolutely untrue. I mean, the dissident right, they absolutely despise Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson has time and time again tried to distance himself in any way, shape, or form from any type of white nativism. He pushes for liberalism. He was hired by the Daily Wire Plus, after his interview with Muhammad Hijab, and that is when he made his very condescending message to Muslims, in which he stated that, why there's so many problems in the Muslim world, and why Sunnis and Shias haven't united, and why we haven't signed on to the Abraham Accords. And this is going to understandably make a lot of Muslims upset, right? So, the dissident right would totally disagree with this particular video because, like they totally understand why Muslims should be against different hegemonic powers that are coming from the West. I think, though, there needs to be a distinction made between what what Western governments are doing, and opinions and thoughts on the Anglosphere towards those powers. Because if you look at Western sentiment among the Anglosphere towards the West, they absolutely despise their governments. They despise the fact that that we even started these wars in the first place. That the United States stayed, even after that, much overstayed its due in Iraq and Afghanistan, and ended up occupying the country for decades. And this has done nothing but created more conflict between Muslims and Westerners, right? So, but what Jordan Peterson done is just basically downplays all of these socio-historical factors that have fomented, and rightly so, anger towards the West in the Muslim sphere. So yeah, so the whole idea that Jordan Peterson is for, like, I'm not going to say the words, but for the GR or against MI is completely, you won't find that in any of his writings. I understand that you can't take the time, no one can take the time to read all of this stuff. This is what Douglas Murray talks about. The way that Douglas Murray presents it is that the main problem with immigration in Europe is not the immigrants themselves, but Islam, basically. So Murray's take on it is, if Muslims come to the West and they leave Islam, they leave their culture, and they become, just like regular Europeans, a mass-consuming, liberal, anti-traditionalist, irreligious style, European, then that'll solve our problems. And I mean, Murray's take is so bad, But this is what, again, because the dissident right has been completely deplatformed, these are the main talking points that come across, that come across, that come into the mainstream discourse. So, this, and again, this is not Yahya Birt's problem on his own. This, even Hamza Yusuf and, Abdul Hakim Murat and, pretty much every other Muslim leader is completely unaware that these, like differing opinions among the European right exists. And that's why the discourse is it's kind of like this binary discourse where it's like you have the traditionalist Muslims on one side, and then you have the anti-traditionalist liberal white Europeans on the other side, with no other differing opinions or no other differing thought. And these conversations that happen are so few and far between that you never get to hear any other type of opinion. The only Islamic, spokesperson that has ever entered these realms of the dissident right is Daniel Hakikaju. But, again, in Islam for Europeans, we don't support Daniel Hakikaju. And I'm going to get into the mistakes that were made from him interviewing Mark Collette and Jean-Francois Guérepi. But even Daniel, when he ended up interviewing these people in the first hour, he completely thought that, Mark thinks the way that Jordan Peterson does or Douglas Murray does, that that he was just this pro-Zionist, neoconservative, pro-liberal, anti-Islam person. And that the fact that there's no pretext as to why Muslims are coming to Europe. And after an hour, he finally got the idea. But like still within that realm, they made several mistakes. And I get into those mistakes very quickly. So I think engaging in these types of discourses, I'm talking about Hamza Yusuf and Jordan Peterson. I'm talking about Hamza Yusuf with Roger Scruton, Muhammad Hijab, Jordan Peterson. There is utility in these types of interviews, and the reason for that is there are tens of thousands of non-Muslims who never hear arguments or even discourse from Muslims. When the anti-Islam right gives all these arguments about slavery and child marriage and female genital mutilation, they hear all these talking points, and Muslims basically don't even respond to these talking points. And I understand that normally these types, they're establishment types, they don't interview Muslims. Amala from PragerU, she's yet to interview a Muslim person, I think, except for maybe Bassem Youssef. Ben Shapiro isn't going to interview a Muslim. So, these people watching these videos, they just, a lot of them, maybe they're completely in line with what Ben Shapiro thinks or what Jordan Peterson thinks. Maybe they're on the fence. But at the same time, you have tens of thousands of people who've never heard a retort from Muslims. And engaging in an interview like this, whether or not Jordan Peterson converts to Islam or not, at the very least, you have people who have never heard these arguments from a Muslim. And, we get to tell our side of the story. But when you take this, don't even talk to them approach, it's based on two false assumptions. One is that by engaging with them, you are endorsing them. This doesn't hold any water because, let's say, for example, the interview between Hamza Yusuf and Jordan Peterson never would have happened. Jordan Peterson still would have had his contract with Daily Wire. Jordan Peterson still would have kept writing books. Jordan Peterson still would have had his YouTube channel. Right. So, this whole idea that, if you even talk to these people, somehow, people are going to hate Muslims more. It doesn't hold any water because they're going to have this, this huge platform anyway. And at the very least, you're able to, give the Muslim side of the story. So you have thousands of people who may be on the fence about Islam who think, hey, maybe Hamza Yusuf was right about this. I'm going to study Islam now. And who knows how many people watch that video who are non-Muslim, who were neutral, who just like, wow, maybe I'm going to give Islam a second look and, read more into it. Right. So I do think that there's utility in these videos. Now, one point in which I will agree with Brother Yahya is that having the false assumption that this is the best way to give dawah by going straight to these leaders in the hopes that they're going to convert to Islam. And the problem with that is that your Jordan Petersons of the world and Ben Shapiro's or whatever. These people are very entrenched in their own organizations, even in the dissident right. The dissident right, maybe they have their own political organizations, maybe they have their own inner circles. But for them to convert to Islam, first of all, would be very difficult for them to do privately, let alone publicly, because they're very entrenched in their own organizations. And since they have, Jordan Peterson has an exclusive contract with the Daily Wire, there would be enormous financial and social and political implications from converting to Islam, right? So, and then on top of that, and I stated with Brother Bilal in the features, the other pitfall is maybe they do convert to Islam, but it's not sincere. Now, we can't question their sincerity, but at the same time, converting to Islam in and of itself is a very big undertaking. There's a lot of lifestyle changes. When you have such a major platform, you could be they very much could be sincere, but at the same time, what's going to happen is that there's a possibility that they're going to end up grifting towards their own, towards the right, and making Islam conform to their own political worldview, right? So, in that respect, and because they're so deeply entrenched in the establishment, it's to think that this should be the only method of discourse, is with these big Daily Wire Plus PragerU type names. It's not the best strategy. A better strategy is if you take a communitarian approach to the dawah. I'm going to get into that a little bit later. So, some of the things that I want to clear up with Brother Yahya and what he said. Now, I'm assuming that he was referring to Islam for Europeans when he said that there are some, minor groups that advocate for quote unquote whites only marriage. Now, I think this is a straw man argument. Intercultural marriage in Islam is allowed. This is not haram. At the same time, when Muslims are going to largely non-Muslim populations, they have to understand that it is very difficult for people to convert to Islam when in their own cultural sphere, they're the only Muslim, right? If you're not encouraging an environment where there are other Muslims within their own sphere, or for the converts themselves to collectivize into a cohesive wolf pack, it is going to be very difficult for people to convert to Islam publicly, join a Muslim community, and stay in Islam for any period of time. Now, when you look at the African American community who converted en masse to Islam, when they convert to Islam, Islam is already part of their history. They may already have a relative who's already Muslim. And in general, there's a general consensus within the African American community that Islam is part of their history, and it's not unusual for someone to convert to Islam. But when you're advocating for that people of European descent who convert to Islam must assimilate into an existing Muslim community, it just becomes a total vacuum. They completely exit the Anglosphere, and they don't give any type of collective effort to try to allay their family and community's fears about Islam, which is what they should be doing. And it's the best thing that they should be doing for for not just for themselves, but for the greater Muslim community. So to say that we're advocating for whites only marriage, it's a complete straw man argument. It makes people think that we're segregationists from the 1950s or something. In general, it's better for people from the same cultural background to marry each other, because there's going to be converting to Islam is difficult enough. When you're adding in all these different cultural norms that you must adhere to, because you are the only convert in that particular sphere, that becomes extremely difficult for converts to manage, right? So that's why it's easier for converts to intermarry, from the same cultural group. And on top of that, these non-Muslim populations that Muslims are immigrating to, they have never seen a cultural synthesis of their culture within Islam. Muslim countries such as Pakistan, the Arab world, Malaysia, Indonesia, Somalia, these cultures have had centuries to develop a cultural synthesis of their culture within Islam, which is perfectly fine. As he said, like we, highly endorse the concept of urf within any particular subcommunity. But when you're going to a non-Muslim country and you're telling the converts from the country, you guys cannot collectivize in the same manner that we've done. You must assimilate. Their own community is not going to see this cultural synthesis. And that's why it's optimal, but not obligatory, for European descendant converts to marry each other. Right. So, and if you talk to most born Muslims, who are mostly our supporters, they completely agree with this. They said absolutely, because they understand that there is a lot of culture differences within their own culture. Even to marry into another culture from an adjacent Muslim country is very difficult for them. And it's specious reasoning to think that thousands of non-Muslims are going to convert to Islam and they're all going to marry into a different culture. Like when Ira goes to an African tribe in Africa or in Papua New Guinea and gives dawah to them, they're just thinking about Tawheed, the worship of one God, that Muhammad, peace be upon him, is his final messenger. That's their only, requirement for these tribes to convert to Islam. Imagine, if we on top of that said, okay, now that you've converted to Islam, you all have to marry, Pakistanis or Indians or Arabs. I mean, that's not going to work for them. They know what they know. So yeah, I mean, this whole idea that we're for whites only marriage, it's a complete straw man argument. The other thing is that let's see here. I do agree with Yahya's statement where he says that Islam is for all cultures, that no one should have to give up their culture per se to become an Orthodox Muslim. And I also agree that Muslims who come from other countries should not be expected to give up their culture either, right? They have cultural rights even as newcomers in a foreign land. You cannot expect Muslims who come from other countries to change just for us, right? I'll give you a perfect example. In one of the mosques here in Ontario, all of the Muslims are from a Desi background. They all wear shalwar kameez, and all the women wear black niqabs. All their iftars are super spicy. The modernist liberal idea that these people should all assimilate into the Western culture and that they should all wear suits and ties, or business casual, that all the women should dress more modern. To expect a Muslim community to do this is beyond their scope. It's unfair. And you're right, it is an example of Western cultural hegemony. So I agree with Brother Yahya there. What I don't agree with is that the idea that somehow this mosque is going to be able to, by and large, provide all the things that converts to Islam need. Because by and large, they don't want to enter the Anglosphere. They don't want to communicate with their non-Muslim families. At most, they'll say, we'll come to an open house or come to the mosque. But the fact of the matter is, the majority of non-Muslims don't want to go to a mosque, right? So it's much better if you compartmentalize these into different communities and say, for converts who converted to Islam, you should create your own organization. That way you can better give dawah to your people. That's not separatism. You can still pray with the people at that mosque. You can still give salam to them on the street. You can still give them all their Islamic rights. But this idea that, we're all going to live under one roof and, all interact with one another, and that is somehow going to take care of the needs of people coming into Islam is simply, it's beyond the scope. It's definitely beyond the scope. Okay. Yeah, and the dissident right would actually agree with this particular point. I don't think that Muslims from other countries should dress in a modernist style anyway. They're very they take a liberal stances on this. They believe that Muslims shouldn't assimilate into this kind of Western cultural hegemony. Richard, I think it was Richard Spencer, Keith Woods, and Ed Dutton. They had an interview. They had like a talk basically, and it was taken down from YouTube. But they basically said, you see like these kind of Jordan Peterson style liberal conservatives saying, oh, look at these Muslims, in their mosque, they're not assimilating, they're not changing the way they dress, and they critiqued this idea. They said, no, they're hanging on to their tradition, and this is something that we should do as well. I also agree with Brother Yahya when he says that it's a myth that there's this kind of culturalated, pristine version of Islam that white converts think they converted to when they converted to Islam. I completely agree with him there. I believe that cultural particularities should be allowed in all cultures as long as they do not go against the Sharia. And for white converts to think that they've converted to this pristine version of Islam and that all these other Muslims from other cultures should, stop behaving so quote unquote culturally. I disagree with that. Yeah. So, just moving on to some of the other points that he made. I'm just, I have my notes that he made. Yeah, I think the idea that we're going to be all one community over time, I disagree with this in the terms that we're all going to be this one homogenous gray blob that all interacts with one another at all times. People were assuming that everyone is going to spend their time in this multicultural Islamic model when really Muslims only spend 0 to maybe 5 hours tops in this mosque environment. Most of their time is spent with their outside sphere, their family, their extended family, where they work, who they hang out with, and people live in their own spheres. Even here in London, I mean, you have Arab markets, you have Pakistani halal markets, and even Arab Christians go to the Arab markets. Why? Because it's they feel more at home within their own cultural community, right? He did say that is marginalized groups. I assume he's talking about Islam for Europeans, but I could be wrong. That we support this kind of white ethnocentrism. Well, I think if he's talking about I4E, I think if he could be more clear, that would be great. If he means ethnocentrism as being focused on one's own community, this is what Muslim and non-Muslim communities both do, right? It's simply human nature. People are ethnocentric by their very nature. They want to keep their culture. Yeah, I mean, what it becomes a problem is that when you're denigrating other cultures, you're saying that my culture is better in the sight of Allah, than this other culture. That we're totally against. And I would disavow anyone who says otherwise. Okay. Yeah. So it came to all the quote unquote white nativist figures that Yahya was mentioning, and be it Islam for Europeans and the people watching us, even the born Muslims, they spend enough time on Twitter that these people are not white nativists. They're pro-liberal, anti-Islam, neoconservatives. They I have no love lost for these people. So to be totally upfront, I'm not a fan of Jordan Peterson. I think that he's an establishment conservative. I think that he's sold out, and I think that his video on Message to Muslims was really denigrating. And a lot of Muslims have already disowned him really. Just moving along, some of the things that he said. Yeah, so I mean, just equating white nativism or white nationalism with the interventionism of the Muslim world by Western governments. You need to separate what our governments are doing, which is absolutely horrible, with how the people feel about that. Because like I said before, a lot of white people are totally against what our governments are doing. The Anglosphere staged the biggest protest in the history of the world against the invasion of Iraq in 2003, and that was to show the Muslim world that we don't agree with this. And this whole idea that that nationalists think that it was a good thing that these Muslim countries were bombed into submission. Absolutely not. I mean, they were totally against it from the get-go. Also he talked about Yoram van Klafferen converting to Islam and the fact that Abdul Hakim Marat specifically gave him dawah. and his critique of the fact that Van Clafren still held, opinions about, the migration crisis in Europe. My take on that is as follows. We have to look at it from a humanitarian perspective, and that, a lot of these refugees are forced to go to Europe because the condition of the refugee camps in the Muslim world are in absolutely dilapidated condition. They don't get nearly enough funding. UNRWA, I mean, they can only do so much, and and it's far cheaper, as Muslims to support and donate to Islamic organizations that help Muslims who are living in these areas to begin with. To put one refugee who may or may not be Muslim in the first place in a hotel in Britain, that costs thousands of pounds. You can feed an entire family, for years on end, for Muslim refugees that are living in the Muslim world. That's not to say that I do care about all Muslims, who are in these horrible situations, and I do think that it's not their fault because our Western governments have been absolutely oppressive to the Muslim lands. But we have to look at it from a humanitarian perspective, and that is it really the best thing to have most of the refugees be in Europe at this time when, again, eventually the money is going to run out. And as a whole, it's better to look at the root of the problem. And that is that, it's this, this overarching globalist agenda to destabilize the Muslim world and make it far less enticing, to stay in, Muslim countries where they would be safer, right? And B, feel comfortable enough that they have the option to go back to, where they grew up from, where their parents grew up from, if they so choose, right? So we're against any type of voluntary repatriation. It should be completely up to Muslims where they want to live. But, we have to look at the underlying causes of what has caused, this migration crisis. So that's how I feel about that. So I haven't had time to look at Joran van Clafren's stance on that. So, but, I'm assuming he doesn't, want Muslims who are currently living in Europe to be oppressed by the native population there, right? Also, let's see here. So, state control of Islam, yeah. So the idea of speaking out against the fact that he thinks that Muslim scholars should speak out against oppressive Muslim governments. I have no problem with it. I think that Muslim leadership living in the West, I mean, they should take a very hard stance against what is happening to Muslims in Muslim lands, because Muslims living in Muslim lands, they don't have the ability to do that. They have to talk and interact in a way that's not going to get them in trouble with the regimes that they're living in. That's a very difficult space for them to be in. And I think as Muslims living in the West, we do have an obligation to talk about these issues that are affecting Muslims in Muslim countries, right? When it comes to critique of, for example, the resistance in Muslim countries, when Muslims have resisted their own governments, this whole idea of like quietism, I mean, to a fault, I can understand the quietist argument in that look at the destruction that it ended up causing to the Muslim world. But at the same time, like people can only take so much. I think I didn't live in that situation. I'm not from those countries, so I don't know what they're going through. And I think in that regard, and I have to be very careful how I word this. Like again, for us in the West to criticize, the fact that Muslims have been under oppression for so long in those countries, and say that they shouldn't at least express some resistance because it'll cause fitna. I know it's pretty specious reasoning. I mean, again, you could be a political quietist and advocate for that, but at the same time, you have to realize that Muslims living in the Muslim world are living in a totally different paradigm than we are. Okay, so getting back to it, I mean, he said that we should dismantle "quote unquote" white supremacy as white converts and get off of our pedestal. He said he should do this himself. Okay, I agree with that. I think that Islam for Europeans is totally against white pedestalism. I think that when we do convert to Islam, a lot of mosques, they voice this upon us. They want us to be like this kind of savior figure that converts their whole family and community, that acts as the Muslim community's advocate. I think that this is really unhealthy for most white converts because a lot of them are just trying to survive. They don't understand the different Muslim subcultures. And they don't understand even the attitudes in the Anglosphere towards Islam. The best remedy for that is if white converts collectivize and form their own organizations in the same way that Muslim subcultures already have done, because this would officially remove us from the white savior status. We wouldn't have to be seen as this kind of like savior figure anymore. I agree that we're completely against white pedestalism. So I think we're in agreement in that regard. But I think we shouldn't take this approach that Muslim converts are going to become this integrated member of their community, just by conversion. Okay, so I mean, because really, how can you not be a savior when you're just a minority within a minority? It's still just inevitable that existing Muslim subcommunities are going to act that way towards converts, right? The idea that only white people can convert other white people to Islam, okay, that's a straw man argument too. No one is saying that non-white Muslims should be forbidden from giving dawah to white people. That's an essentialist statement. First of all, if you look at Muhammad Hijab's video entitled, I forget the exact title, but it's about how Muslims shouldn't bow down to the liberal white man. They themselves, I'm talking about born Muslims by and large, are sick and tired of trying to explain Islam to the white man. As we stated before on this channel several times, the families of white converts will very rarely want to enter the Muslim sphere, and vice versa. It's very difficult to get them to go to a mosque or any Islamic environment, and Muslims don't want to enter the converts' non-Muslim environment either, for good reason. Whenever converts have created their own organization that focus on giving dawah to their people, results are simply night and day. I mean, they're enormously successful. You can look at Islam in Spanish, you can look at the African American Muslim community. It's a lot easier for people from their own sphere to specialize in giving dawah to their people because they understand the lingo, they understand the culture. They already have the social capital built up because they're their own family members or the people they play tennis with. They have the same interests, right? But that doesn't mean that non-white Muslims can't give dawah to Muslims from other backgrounds. I just think that the focus should be with the converts from that particular community. You have to look at it in the same way you look at like a health network. For example, you have in any city you have health professionals. You have your family doctor. You have podiatrists, pediatrics, gynecologists, dermatologists, drug rehab, right? To say that they should all be under one roof and they should all specialize in the same thing, it's not optimal. You would never put the drug rehab, center in the same center as like a sexual assault crisis center, right? You would never, or a gynecology. You wouldn't put a gynecology lab next to like an andrology lab. It just doesn't make any sense. But you have your family doctor who's good at general knowledge and can refer his patients to other medical professionals, right? So you have to think of it as a much more hybrid way. Even when you look at black and white converts in America, there's overlap. We both are Western Muslims. We both have a significant percentage of our population that's Christian. But there are definitely differences between a white person. I mean, situational differences, cultural differences between white Americans who convert to Islam and black Americans who convert to Islam. And to say that there should be this cookie cutter approach, it's just not realistic. Okay? Trying to look at some of the other things here. yeah, I mean, the whole idea of like a three-tone Islam, like I get what Brother Yahya is saying. Having white, brown, and black converts at the same time. I think near the end he said that he didn't say a three-tone Islam to say that white. There's just one white culture and one brown culture and one black culture. There are many different cultures that exist within those three groups, right? So yeah, so I mean that's one particular thing that I guess we would agree on. But at the same time, you have to foster a subcommunity of each cultural group because a singular white convert who converts to Islam, if he doesn't have a wolf pack with the converts around him, he or she will have no choice but to assimilate into an existing Muslim culture, right? And to ask the Muslim community to take care of their needs is simply beyond their scope. It's far too expensive, and there's already huge existent mutual animosities between existent Muslim subcommunities, especially in the UK, and the white British. And to think that this white convert is going to be able somehow to navigate this without a collectivization of the white converts, it's specious reasoning. I don't think any white British convert is going to survive very long in that particular type of setup. That doesn't mean that you can't give all other Muslims your Islamic rights, but there definitely needs to be a concerted effort from the converts of that group, that cultural group, to collectivize. Right? Yeah, I mean, again, and if you don't do this, what will happen is that again you marry into a different Muslim culture. As the convert, we all know you're going to be expected to assimilate into that culture, especially if you're a woman. And your kids are not going to retain anything of the converts culture. They're going to lean more towards the born Muslim culture in that particular instance. And the people from that group are the non-Muslims from that country are never going to see this cultural synthesis of their urf within Islam. So yeah, I think that's pretty much about it. I've gone on for quite some time, so I'm just going to leave it there. Please, in the comment section, leave your comments. I am willing to have a conversation with Brother Yahya. I know that Bilal from the Features has also expressed interest. We would be willing to have a dialogue with Brother Yahya regarding this. So yeah, please like and subscribe to Islam for Europeans. Brother Yahya, if you're listening, please don't take this the wrong way. This was just basically a critique of the article that you wrote, which you mentioned Islam for Europeans, and also your interview with the Thinking Muslim. I do think that there are some points of agreement, and I do think that we agreed on certain things. It's just the way of improving the status of Islam in the West, whether that's converts or Muslims who come from other backgrounds. So that's my time for the day. My name is Robert. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.